সবাইকে আমন্ত্রণ ইউএস এমবেসি ঢাকা এবং দেশ টিভির বিশেষ আয়োজন আ কনভারসেশন উইথ বাংলাদেশ বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। আজকে আমাদের একটা স্পেশাল এপিসোড, কারণ আমাদের সাথে আছেন একজন স্পেশাল গেস্ট যিনি কাজ করছেন আমেরিকার পররাষ্ট্রমন্ত্রী হিলারি ক্লিনটনের সহকারী মন্ত্রী হিসেবে দক্ষিণ এবং মধ্য এশিয়ার পররাষ্ট্রনীতি নিয়ে। It is my great honor to welcome Assistant Secretary Robert Blake. Sir, welcome to a conversation with Bangladesh.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
আর বরাবরের মতো আমাদের সাথে আছেন কিছু তরুণ বাংলাদেশি। পরিচয় করে দিচ্ছি, যাকে অবশ্য আপনারা তাকে এই শোতে এর আগেও দেখেছেন। Young businessman, Deputy CEO of Multimode Group, Mr. Tabit Awal. Tabit bhai, it's good to have you back.
Dhanyabad, Shuber. Thank you to United States Embassy also for inviting me to this show and this historic event. And at the same time, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Assistant Secretary Robert Blake to Bangladesh again. And sir, we look forward to seeing you more often.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our দর্শক স্পেশাল এপিসোডে আছে আমাদের সাথে স্পেশাল প্যানেলিস্ট। সবার সাথে পরিচয় করে দিচ্ছি। নুহের খান, ম্যানেজিং ডিরেক্টর, দেশ এনার্জি। তানজিলা মান্নান, প্রেসিডেন্ট সানম্যান গ্রুপ। প্রিয়তা ইফতেখার, ভাইস প্রেসিডেন্ট, ভলান্টিয়ার ফর বাংলাদেশ, ঢাকা ডিস্ট্রিক্ট। আলিফ রহমান, এক্সিকিউটিভ ডিরেক্টর, নর্দার্ন গ্রুপ। মিস্টার শামীম আহসান, সিনিয়র ভাইস প্রেসিডেন্ট অফ বেসিস অ্যান্ড সিইও অফ এখনি.com। এবং আছেন নাবিলা হোসেন, লেকচারার অ্যাট আমেরিকান ইন্টারন্যাশনাল ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ বাংলাদেশ। Thank you and welcome to our conversation with Bangladesh. Sir, you've been here in Bangladesh quite a few times. You've been here just this past May.
Yes.
So, what brings you to Bangladesh?
Well, this time around I'm here because we're very proud to be hosting the South Asian Women's Economic Symposium. And this is a really exciting event because we're bringing together 100 different women from around the region, including from Myanmar, but also from as far away as Kazakhstan and Afghanistan, to talk about women's economic empowerment and strategies for doing that, how to create networks, how to develop leadership skills, and all of those kind of things to help to really empower women in this region. So we're very excited about that, but also it'll be a very wonderful opportunity to see all of our friends in the government, to talk about how we can continue to move our dynamic partnership forward.
Sir, we will talk more about the Entrepreneurs Symposium in a bit. But we have heard so much about this new Silk Road, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton during her May visit spoke about a new Silk Road, and Ambassador Dan Mosen has said that Bangladesh is the center of all this regional connectivity. So what can Bangladesh do to further enhance its regional connection with its neighbors?
Well, that's a great question. And I have to make a slight distinction. When we talk about the new Silk Road, we're talking about embedding Afghanistan into its regional neighborhood, mostly into Central Asia, but also India and Pakistan. Eventually, of course, we'd like to extend it to Bangladesh and beyond. But we think there's also a very important new opportunity, which is afforded by the progress that India has made with Bangladesh in expanding your trade relations, but also now the opening with Myanmar. And so for the first time you have an opportunity to connect the huge markets of South Asia with the markets of Southeast Asia. And you have an equally important opportunity to connect Bangladesh with Kunming through Myanmar. So you have both east-west opportunities, but also north-south opportunities. And Bangladesh is right in the middle of that. And so your country stands to benefit a great deal from that, and I'm been very pleased to have conversations both with members of your government, but also the business community and some of the think tank community, and I think they too are very seized with this opportunity.
Sir, you have brought up a lot of important points on the Silk Road, and many people think that the success will rely on young people here, like young businessmen like
Absolutely.
Tabit Awal. Maybe Tabit bhai, you can add more on this.
For sure. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Robert Blake. It's true. The Bangladesh, since historically, has been actually the crossroads of Southeast Asia as well as South Asia. Being a riverine terrain, we've always had sea as well as river transportation go up and down into Central Asia through the mountains of Khyber Pass, all the way through Myanmar into Thailand. So the youth of Bangladesh, or the emerging tigers, as we're now branded as, we really want to see this opportunity. We want to see the opportunity of regional trade. We want to see the opportunity of regional activities. And the Silk Road, to us, is more of a metaphor than an actual physical road, because there's air travel, there's sea travel, there's communication that runs through fiber and satellites. So we look forward to this opportunity, and we're hoping with the emergence of Myanmar and with the opening up of India and Bangladesh also prospering, we see a lot of good days ahead for us.
Thank you, David Bhai. And the youth of Bangladesh, they have to carry the Bangladeshi flag ahead. Maybe you can add.
Thank you. Welcome, Assistant Secretary Blake. We are very happy to have you here. Since we are talking about trade, the youth are more interested in trade rather than aid. And as you know, that the Bangladeshi engineers and professionals are working in top Fortune 500 companies in U.S. and contributing there, have proven their expertise. And also the youth of Bangladesh, we have 160 million people, and more than 60% are less than 25 years old. That means they are young, trainable, tech-savvy, and also we have the largest English-speaking pool, one of the largest in the world as well. So many of the companies like Google, Microsoft, Dell, HP have started their marketing offices in Bangladesh, and which we are very happy about. But we talk about India plus one, China's plus one strategies. So what can we do to attract these global giants to have their research and development centers in Bangladesh? And since India and China are becoming very expensive, and global companies like Samsung, they have already set up their research and development centers. So what can we do to attract them?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to do the best possible job we can to expand trade and investment between our two countries. And we've made good progress already. U.S. exports to your country doubled last year to $1 billion. And of course, we are already your largest investor and also your largest export market. So there's a very good foundation to build on. But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. And one of the things that we've proposed is a Trade and Investment Cooperation Framework Agreement, a TICFA, which would allow both sides to look at where the continued impediments are, see how we can remove them, and really move forward in that way. And so we have these with all of our major trading partners. We hope that the government will be willing to move forward with that very soon. I think another thing that your government can do, as I say, is to help to drive a lot of this regional integration. Because even though you have a big market, you still have don't have a huge middle class yet. And so that's really what investors and traders are going to be looking for. So the more you can have an integrated market with these other, with India and with other major markets, that's going to obviously serve as a great platform to attract more investment into your country. I think another part of it is also just creating the best possible investment climate here in this country. And that means providing more reliable energy sources, and I know you're working on that. It means, frankly, work on the political side. You have one of the best democracies in this region, but you also have things like hartals, which continue to disrupt the business environment here. So I think it's also incumbent on the political parties to do more to work together to create a kind of unified platform so that there won't be any political impediments to investment. So these are some modest steps, but some really quite important steps that I think your government could take.
Maybe we can have a question from Mr. Nuher Khan, who is working in the energy sector.
Thank you. Just to add on the regional integration point, it's very important that you mentioned Myanmar's integration. And we have the SAARC platform, which brings the regional countries together. And in 2003, SAARC had actually agreed on a common electricity grid between the regions. And I think this should be extended towards Myanmar, because we know Myanmar is very energy rich. I think it creates a sort of an interdependence between the regions where they can cooperate better. How would the U.S. Perhaps facilitate or make this more effective among the regions so that there's greater trade cooperation, and perhaps it would probably lead to the effectiveness of the Silk Road as we discuss right now?
Well, you mentioned energy. I think that's a really key part of this. Your government recently reached a very important agreement with Myanmar on the delimitation of your boundaries. And that, I think, will now open the way for much greater exploration and hopefully production from your offshore energy resources. And I know that, for example, General Electric has already taken quite a big stand here and made some important investments. But your government has recently opened up more acreage to outside exploration, so that there'll be some bids coming in on that. So I think American companies can help to explore and then actually develop these resources. And again, I think there's going to be quite important opportunities on the other side as well. Myanmar has its own gas resources, so there'll be a market for developing and probably selling that gas into the Bangladeshi market. So these are all opportunities not only for American companies but others. And I think, again, the more open that your government can be, you're going to be able to realize these opportunities quite quickly.
Thank you very much, sir. And Tabitha, we have already talked about how youth are such an important component. And another important component is, sir, the strong spirit of entrepreneurship. You have just attended the South Asian Women Entrepreneurship Symposium. How this symposium will help women of Bangladesh?
Well, Secretary Clinton has often talked about how women are often underrepresented in the economies of many states around the world. And obviously no state can reach its full potential if half of its population is denied the opportunity to participate economically in the nation's future. So your country is actually a country that's made enormous strides in this area. You know, you have, of course, the wonderful example of the 8 million Grameen women shareholders who have used microcredit to really improve their lives and their livelihoods and that of their families and of their communities. You have wonderful educational institutions like the Asian University for Women down in Chittagong. And you have the great example of the tremendous progress you've made to reduce poverty, particularly among women. For example, you're very close to achieving the Millennium Development Goals for maternal and child mortality. And that is so important, and again, such an important part of, again, providing the opportunity for women, first to get an education, to get proper health care, and then really to succeed. So there's a very good reason why we chose Bangladesh as the site for this conference. And again, I think that the Bangladeshi women will lead by example and will help to develop this women's network that I talked about.
আড্ডার পর্যায়ে নিচ্ছি ছোট্ট একটা বিরতি, সাথেই থাকুন, ফিরছি কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই। স্বাগত আরেকবার কনভারসেশন উইথ বাংলাদেশ, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে। আড্ডা দিচ্ছি আমেরিকার সহকারী পররাষ্ট্রমন্ত্রী রবার্ট ব্লেকের সাথে।
We agree that it would be highly unwise to keep, especially in Bangladesh where 50% gender is female, 50% gender is male, to keep half of our population out of the economic progress and the progress of the country. And another thing that the Economist has also just mentioned previously in an article, that economic growth doesn't always prove economic development. And Bangladesh is a best case of that, where we have maybe slow growth but very high economic development, and that's probably because of the female participation in our economy. Another thing I'd like to share with you, that our women are not just restricted to laborers or garments workers. We now have opportunities where women are moving up to management levels and working in diversified businesses. Maybe our panelists can share with us one of their experiences. Please. Here.
More and more women can be seen these days in businesses. As the president of Banglaline, my team and I make the working environment more comfortable for women, and this encouragement will definitely boost the economy.
When you say make the environment more comfortable, in what ways do you do that?
Because culturally, we sometimes see among the women population who come from, let's say, middle class or lower middle class, they sometimes become a bit nervous interacting with industry. And perhaps there's a level of intimidation, perhaps, I'm just making a guess. But I think what she's trying to do in her organization is foster an environment and making them feel confident in representing themselves in business interaction. And of course, we make mistakes as we go along, but we learn as well. And I think perhaps that's the level of comfort that you're probably trying to provide or promote in your organization, if I'm not mistaken. Because we do see women, invariably we see a lot of women in senior positions in banking as well. We see them being represented in the management committee of banks these days, which is very good to see. I mean, more and more as organizations come forward and they make an environment where women can come and represent themselves and also basically go about sharing their ideas in industry, which I think is it's a wonderful thing to see. And of course, women are very well represented in our politics as well. We see it in our parliament. our leader of the opposition, of course, our prime minister is, of course, a woman, and then our deputy leader of the House as well. So I think women are being represented in our economy more, and we'd like to see this happening more in the future as well.
He made a really important point about entrepreneurship, which is that oftentimes people are afraid to fail,
Absolutely,
and there's absolutely no problem with failing.
But you learn
if you look at
really.
Steve Jobs, if you look at some of the most famous, successful people in the United States, they often had very difficult starts. They took some risks and didn't do very well to begin with. But that's okay, because they learned from that experience.
The entrepreneurship, as you had mentioned, was started by the likes of Grameen Bank and some other organizations
Yes.
where credit was a big issue. Until you have credit, no business can start, whether you be female or male. And in our culture, females were not only seen as less competent, but not credit-worthy. So that Bangladesh has hopefully developed and overcome those challenges. But what other places do you see that the U.S. views Bangladesh where we need improvement in order to be, say, same competitive nature as any other female working in the United States or elsewhere?
Let me just make one point on what you just said about credit as well, which is that, you know, you mentioned earlier about the World Bank. The World Bank has done some very interesting studies about women, and they found that, in fact, women are among the very best investments that any country can make, because women give a great deal back to their own communities in the form of education, in the form of health care. And so an investment in a woman's education, for example, will in effect have a ripple effect across the family, across the community. And that's one of the reasons that we really work so hard on women's empowerment. In terms of your question on what more can be done, one of the other kind of focuses of my trip this time around is going to be on labor. All of us in America were deeply saddened by the terrible fire at Tazreen that took the lives of more people. And at the same time, it's put a lot of pressure on the buyers in the United States who are buying ready-made garments from Bangladesh. And there's a lot of questions being asked of the buyers about what are you doing to help improve factory conditions so that these kinds of terrible tragedies don't happen again in Bangladesh. And if those kinds of conditions are not being addressed adequately, perhaps you should source elsewhere. So this is really quite a defining moment for Bangladesh to try to improve labor conditions, to allow for the registration of unions, and to start what's called a Better Work program, which is something that the International Labor Organization and the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank, have been working on. And I think you're very close now to signing an agreement with Better Work that would really pay quite important dividends for your country. So again, this is quite an important opportunity to basically seize an opportunity from this tragedy.
Sir, we will get back to, we'll talk more about labor issues and working conditions.
Great.
But we have a couple of young social entrepreneurs,
Yes.
female social entrepreneurs here. Let's hear from them that what are the challenges you have faced while working?
The thing that I've faced recently is that males do promote us a lot. They really love the fact that I'm a vice president of such a huge organization. But what amazes me is that everywhere I go, I'm probably the only female around in a conference, or probably there are hardly two other females around me. So I was worried about the fact that how can I encourage more females into the roles that I'm doing right now, especially the ones who are away from Dhaka or Sylhet or Chittagong, the remoted ones. They're really interested, but you know what facilities can we give them?
First of all, you can help by just the power of your example, which is so important. But you know, one of the things that I've been really impressed about is that our embassy here has been working a lot with young Bangladeshis of many kinds. We have various sort of youth empowerment efforts underway to encourage youth leadership and community efforts. And I think that's been a tremendously important source of inspiration for many, many young people. And I've been so inspired myself to see how young people have really run with these things. And for example, started community-based organizations to work on local problems like water or like sanitation. And it shows to me the dynamism of young people in this country. Of course, a lot of that is based on your education, but it's also just, again, I think the kind of rich diversity of your people that has allowed these kind of things to flourish. So I really want to congratulate you. And we have a number of different programs, public-private partnerships and other things to help young people like you, young women like you. So I would encourage you to be in touch with our public affairs section and see how we can partner with you. Because if it's not with the government itself, we have also partnerships with local businesses and with businesses in the United States who are very keen themselves to work with young women around the world.
I have also faced similar problems because beside being a lecturer, I'm also a vice president at Bangladesh Youth Empowerment Society. That's an organization
Wonderful.
run by some state alumni. I've also felt that in some places it's like 1 or 2 women. But I've seen some progress because when we were student leaders, the situation was not as good as it is today. Like here, we have got some vice president from a very big organization, a president from a big business organization. And beside the privileged people, consider some students, give me an example, let me give an example. Consider some students of madrasa, some female students. There was a program I was a part of, which was done by SAIS, that is also an organization run by the state alumni. The program was done with some students of madrasas. And you won't believe, it was a residential program for 4 days, and many female students from the madrasas actually participated there, which was even, we could not even imagine 10 years back.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that. And let me comment on 2 things you said. First is the importance of mentorship. This was something that we talked a lot about in the conference today that we had with these 100 women from all over South Asia. Because so many of these women are very accomplished leaders. And it's very, very important that they mentor younger women and tell them how they got to where they are, give them some practical advice. And I think someone of your accomplishments should do the same thing and always be mindful of the need to give back and to share your knowledge with people who may not have had the same opportunities and how they can get those same opportunities. The other thing I wanted to just mention, since you talked about madrasas, is that we too have tried to really reach out to madrasas here in Bangladesh, because I think one of the notable things about your society has been the very successful efforts that you've made to combat radical and violent extremism, which is really quite an exception here in this country, and quite a contrast to some other countries. So we've wanted to try to help in many ways, and one of the ways that we're doing that is that we've established quite a far-reaching English language training program with many of the madrasas. And one of the things that I'm going to do when I go up to Sylhet is to visit with one of those madrasas and to talk to some of the students who are learning English. And it has a very simple objective, which is to help those students to be able to be competitive once they graduate, so that they can compete for jobs in this job market here, increasingly internationalized job market here in your country. And in many ways, English can be an important tool to help them compete. So, thank you very much for mentioning that.
বিরতি নিচ্ছি আরও একবার, আমাদের সাথেই থাকুন। আর আজকে আড্ডা দিচ্ছি আমেরিকা এবং বাংলাদেশের দ্বিপক্ষীয় সম্পর্ক এবং আঞ্চলিক যোগাযোগ সম্ভাবনা নিয়ে। দেখছেন A Conversation with Bangladesh, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠান। As Assistant Secretary Blake has mentioned that U.S. is working to improve the work conditions for the workers here, but yes, what can we do and what is the real state? And we have a panelist here who owns a garment, so we will definitely hear from him. But as a Bangladeshi businessman, what can be done to improve the work condition?
Work conditions is something that's important worldwide and not just in garments. In Bangladesh, we have work conditions outside of garments. But because garments is such a large part of our economy, and the Western countries being such a large buyer, we're always focused on this issue. But in general, I think the new generation Bangladeshi entrepreneurs or owners, if you want to call them, are very concerned about the environment. The work environment. So we feel that with the help of the United States, indirectly with the buyers itself, we also want to come to proper ethical work standards. We also want to achieve efficiency. And we're also concerned ourselves. But I think the question is that sometimes Bangladesh should not feel that this is just a Bangladeshi-focused issue. I think Bangladeshi youth, we want to be comfortable in knowing that this is, in general, a worldwide focused issue, that wherever there are factories, the U.S. is equally concerned at labor rights, safety, and equality of pay.
Absolutely, and we would like to believe that this was an isolated incident. Maybe you can add, from your experience, you run a garment factory.
What I would like to just add is, I think it's, the garment fire is not a separate incident. It's part of the whole industrialization process. It's part of the learning curve. Because we had similar fires in Brooklyn, New York during the, I think 1911 it was.
Correct.
Yes. And we had similar fires in Pakistan, Lahore, where 248 people died just this year. So I think it's part of the learning curve. And we, as entrepreneurs, we can learn from this, and we can take proper steps to mitigate this sort of situations in the future.
You mentioned the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in 1911,
yes.
Which killed hundreds of people. And that was really a wake-up call for our own manufacturers. And that, in fact, occasioned far-reaching reforms in our own labor sector. And I hope that maybe the same thing can happen here. I mentioned this Better Work program. There's sometimes a misperception that if you allow better labor conditions, perhaps slightly higher wages, and if you spend a little more to ensure safe working conditions, that somehow is going to make your products uncompetitive. And I'd just like to say that's wrong. And the example that we like to use is Cambodia, which not too long ago started a Better Work program. At the time that it started, it had 100 factories. Now, several years later, it has 300 factories. So they have actually marketed the fact that they have a Better Work program to their very great advantage and been able to successfully increase dramatically the foreign investment in their ready-made garment sector. And I think Bangladesh, because of the great experience you already have in the ready-made garment sector, is poised to take a much greater market share of this whole sector, including perhaps from Cambodia, if you take these important steps now.
Thank you very much, sir. You have talked about how U.S. is helping Bangladesh to improve the work conditions for the factory workers. But let's look at it in a larger perspective. What can the U.S. do to improve the lives of Bangladeshi people?
Well, that's a great question. And I'd like to just tell your viewers and all the audience here that we really believe in brand Bangladesh, and we really believe strongly in the future of your country. And that's why we have one of our largest aid programs in all of Asia here in Bangladesh. And that's significant because all of you have heard about the pivot to Asia that we're making. So we're making a strategic bet on Asia, but we're making a strategic bet on Bangladesh as well. After our obviously huge programs in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, our aid program here is the largest in the world. And why is that? It's because, again, we believe in the future of your country, but your government, your country is also a very important partner in all of the big President Obama initiatives that we have. We have one on global climate. We have one on global health. We have one called Feed the Future, which is on food security. And then we have one on Muslim engagement. And every one of those programs benefits not only the people of Bangladesh, but in benefiting the people of Bangladesh, we help the world as well. So by improving food security, we're improving the overall supply of food for the world and helping to reduce food prices around the world. That's just one example. We're also working in areas like disaster management. Your country is one of the most disaster-prone in the world, but your country is also a country that has learned every time there's been a disaster. And so it's instructive that every time there is a disaster, the number of people who die as a result of it goes down every time. And that's because you've really learned from past problems. You've created early warning systems. You have cyclone shelters. And you have a number of other things like that, many of which we've helped to build. And so, again, I think it shows that your country is a good investment and that there really is we can really show some terrific returns on the money that our taxpayers spend here. So we're very excited about the aid program. We're proud of what we do, and we think it's making a difference.
You've mentioned many things about our government needs to do or get done. we agree in the same manner that we also expect a lot more from our present government or present-day politicians than what they have been doing in the past 30 to 40 years. But our political process is moving towards democracy, democratic institutions. Can you just share some thoughts on that regarding how the U.S. views our improvements in the political process? We've just talked about the economy only so far.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that I think one of the most important aspects of Bangladesh is the fact that you are a country of 160 million people with a democracy. You are a secular country, a Muslim majority country, but therefore a very important example for the rest of the world, and particularly for the Muslim world. So let me say that right up front. I think one of the areas where there's still some room to be is to have the parties work more closely together. Secretary Clinton often talks about how, makes the analogy of the rowboat. Everybody is in the rowboat, and if everybody rows together, you're going to go a lot further and a lot faster. Whereas if everybody's pulling in opposite directions, you're obviously not going to make as much progress. And sometimes in Bangladesh, there's a certain zero-sum nature to your politics. There's the perception that if the BNP is gaining, then that's automatically going to be at the expense of the Awami League, or vice versa. And that's a shame, because it doesn't need to be like that, and it certainly isn't like that. And so, for example, now, the BNP is not in power, so they often boycott the current sessions of Parliament. So they're not working to try to improve legislation and things like that. And again, I think that's a shame. You see that in the hartals, which again, I think are a particular concern for the poor, who are not able to work in these kinds of things, but also are a negative signal to foreign investors about how difficult it might be to do a business here. So I'd say that's an area where it would be wonderful to see greater improvement in cooperation between the parties. And I have to say right away, this is not something that's unique to Bangladesh. Even in my own country, the American people are pushing the Republican and Democratic parties to work together to address now the fiscal cliff that is affecting our country. So all of us need to work on these things.
The civil society can play a very strong part, and I think part of the civil society is the American Bangladeshi diaspora. They're also a very, they can play a very strong role, and many of the panelists and our guests here, they have been to United States and studied in U.S. So maybe you can share your thoughts that what role the American Bangladeshis can play to strengthen the bilateral relationships.
I have been fortunate to study in U.S. and we actually have a beautiful organization called American Alumni Association, where the returning graduates from U.S. and they're contributing in every sectors in Bangladesh, starting from civil servants, business, universities, academia, and they're taking different initiatives to promote the bilateral trade and the cultural exchange and things like that. At the same time, the civil society is not, previously the youth were not very active or did not get the opportunity, because if you see the TV talk shows, most of them are, senior people. But the youth have found their own platform, which is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, where they're sharing their thoughts, exchanging ideas.
As you say, I think diaspora communities around the world are playing such an important role back in their own countries. We see that in India, where increasingly members of the Indian diaspora are going back to India because of the great opportunities that now exist in the Indian economy. And we hope that we'll see that as well in Bangladesh. I'm so glad that you're back. But it's so important for people to come back and give back to their own countries. And you talked about social entrepreneurship. I mean, I think that's kind of, in many ways, the wave of the future, because there's such a large conversation going on now on Facebook, on Twitter, things like that. We have the third largest Facebook page in the country among all of the embassies in the world. The embassy Dhaka one is the third largest, which is tremendous. And it just shows that there's this very vital and interesting conversation going on. And people like you are really driving that, and that's really a pleasure to see.
Just to add that more than 30 million people are on the internet in Bangladesh, and expected to be 70 million by the year of 2015.
Wow.
And 2.5 million people are using Facebook, which is going to be more than 10 million in next 12 to 18 months.
I better freshen up my Facebook page right away.
সাথেই থাকুন, আড্ডা দিচ্ছি আমেরিকার সহকারী পররাষ্ট্রমন্ত্রী রবার্ট ব্লেকের সাথে। ফিরব কিছুক্ষণের মধ্যেই। সবাইকে আবারও আমন্ত্রণ A Conversation with Bangladesh, বাংলাদেশের সাথে আড্ডা অনুষ্ঠানে।
Just to backtrack a little bit, I'd like to share a very open secret with you about Bangladesh. We have BNP affiliated families marrying into Army League political families. We have Army League political families who are in business alliances with BNP, political families. So the interaction or the dialogue we talk about does happen, but way below the radar. But we would like to also know or discuss, if possible, that what is the United States doing in trying to get our two political families in dialogue. I know the U.S. has worked very hard on many such issues in other parts of the country, whether it be religious or political divides. And in Bangladesh, we have a family divide. Is there anything we can look forward to from the U.S.?
Well, we can help a little bit in the sense that we always encourage both parties to work together, not only in Parliament, but now as you approach these very important elections you're going to be having in January of 2014, there's a big debate, as you know, about the conduct of those elections and whether there should be a caretaker government or some other system to supervise the conduct of those elections. And our view is that this is really not something that we should give an opinion on, but that in fact the two parties should work together and come to an agreement, hopefully a lasting agreement, that will go well beyond this election to include future elections as well. So again, I think it's important to try to encourage the parties themselves to resolve their differences and to hopefully come up with innovative solutions that will serve the people of your nation.
We talked about democracy, politics, and youth, but we just have to focus beyond the election. We have to strengthen the Anti-Corruption Commission, Public Service Commission, Election Commission, and we have to make sure that youth can come into politics without having muscle power or money power.
Right.
So the campaign finance reform is very much needed, and we need to learn from the best practices from the Western countries, and that's somewhere I think U.S. and Bangladesh can collaborate.
I'm really glad you said that. I have to say, I've served most of my career in developing countries, and in many other countries, people join politics for the wrong reasons. They join politics not to serve the public, but to make money, because they see it as a corruption opportunity. And so the kinds of initiatives that you're talking about and that you talked about, to try to really inspire young people to join government to serve. Remember Abraham Lincoln used to say that government is of the people, for the people, and by the people. And that's what public service is for, and that's why I joined public service, is to help people, not just in my own country, but around the world. And that's why I'm still doing it 27 years later, because every single day I feel like I've been able to make some small difference somewhere, and that's a lovely feeling. And again, I think what you're doing to try to inspire other young people to do the same thing is really tremendous.
I would like to add that we are talking about economic integration and regional connectivity, but there are many unresolved issues.
Well, there are always many unresolved issues, so don't let those fool you too much. First and foremost, it's the responsibility of your government and the governments of Myanmar and India to work out. And oftentimes those governments are sensitive about us getting involved in those kinds of things. But I think President Obama, when he made his very important state visit to Myanmar very recently, talked a lot about the situation of the Rohingya refugees and how there really needs to be a durable solution in Myanmar, and that the citizens and the government of Myanmar need to look towards a path to citizenship for the Rohingya citizens that are based there. And I know that would certainly be of great assistance to your country and would remove one of the small impediments in relations between your two countries. But frankly, I don't see that things like that really impede the progress of regional integration, because I think both governments, really all governments in the region, recognize the tremendous opportunity that exists now.
Sir, thank you very much. As it goes, all good things must come to an end. So we are at the end of our conversation. Tawhid bhai, any final thoughts?
I would like to reach out through you to President Obama We congratulate him on his second term. Given that we know that President Obama has been to more than 52 countries during his first term, so we would like to invite him and hope to see him in Bangladesh with your presence alongside during his second term. And we feel that as we are part of all 4 of the presidential initiatives, it's time he came and saw how we're faring in those initiatives.
Thank you.
So please take our message and thank you for coming.
One last question. You've been here to Bangladesh so many times, so what are the progresses you have seen in your tenure?
Well, I guess the main change that I've seen is just a change in the attitude of the people of Bangladesh, which is that every time I come, I see kind of a wider scope of engagement and a wider ambition to make a difference, not just in your own country, but in other parts of the world. So we see, for example, Barack working in Afghanistan. We see this effort now that's being made at regional integration. We see your country expressing an interest in the gas from the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline. We see your country becoming much more involved with BIMSTEC and hosting the Secretariat of BIMSTEC. And all of those are very, very welcome developments from our perspective because, as I said in the beginning, we really have faith in the future of your country, and we have a real stake in it, and we're making a big investment in it. And so it just underlines our conviction that we have a great interest in working not only with the government of Bangladesh, but also with the people represented by all of you. So I really want to thank you all for coming and for really your terrific engagement on all of the wonderful projects that you're working on, because that in the end is what's going to power your country forward.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for your great perspectives on issues related to Bangladesh. Panelists, thank you very much for your participation. Tabit bhai, thank you very much for coming to our show once again. We had a delightful conversation. দর্শক, আজকের মতো আড্ডা আমরা এখানেই শেষ করছি। পরের মাসে আবারও দেখা হবে নতুন কোনো অতিথির সাথে, নতুন কোনো বিষয় আড্ডা দিতে। সবাই ভালো থাকুন আর দেশের সাথেই থাকুন।